Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, his church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, man, this is crazy. We're at season 4 already, episode 1, and I think most of our listeners are going to remember Tyler Gilreath from season 2. And the reason I wanted to have him back to open up season 4 was because the last time we talked, I received a ton of feedback from people that were very interested in some of the stuff that you had to say. It's actually got more feedback on your podcast than any other podcast. So,
good feedback or bad feedback? Because I wasn't back for season 3, so it must not have been too good.
No, it was good, but I was wanting to get my hands on your other book that we were just talking about, deals more with Revelation, and when you write a book, you write big books. That takes a while to get through them. So at some point, I'd like to dive into that one, but it's actually the book that's not coming out yet that we're going to talk mostly about today.
Sure.
So speaking of that, I went back to that episode in season 2 and re-listened to it, and we touched on some stuff, not the majority of the podcast, but briefly we touched on a subject matter that really was the impetus, the thing that generated a lot of the feedback and the discussions, and people saying, man, that you guys need to talk, just do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah.
And so
drill down deeper.
That's exactly right. So rather than just touching on it briefly, I want to dedicate today's show to that topic. And for those who are listening for the first time and don't know Tyler, he's an author, a speaker, entrepreneur, a realtor, a husband, a dad, and a fellow brother in Christ. So Tyler, welcome back to the show.
Hey, I appreciate it, Craig.
Yeah,
great to always be asked to come back. That means I didn't mess it up completely the first time.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's a privilege to be here.
Being back a second time is always a good thing. Well, I say that. I hope it's a good thing.
Definitely. And I like your new setup here. I mentioned that earlier. Last time we were in the chairs on the floor. Now we have a nice round table. I like it.
Yeah. We took a brief hiatus to do some studio upgrades. We're still working on it. My son Parker is responsible for really putting a lot of this stuff together, or actually all of this stuff together, and revamping it. So
good job, Parker.
Yeah, I think we're getting more professional every season. So maybe next season, who knows what you're going to see.
LED board behind us.
All right, so we're going to get into a seriously taboo topic today, and one that, as I mentioned, you've just finished writing a book about, due to be released, you said probably May?
Yeah, most likely we're on target for May, definitely early summer.
Okay.
Waiting to get that final release date, but it's coming soon.
So I saw the cover. It looks awesome. I was going to share the cover, but I can't share the cover right now because you got the whole publisher deal kind of because you haven't even announced it.
I have not. No, I've announced I've written another book. It will be coming out soon, but I haven't released the information about it yet. So hopefully soon we can get that out to your audience and my readership. And I'm really excited about it. It is. Taboo. It is taboo.
Don't say anything yet, because I'm going to set for our listeners.
Okay.
I'm going to set the tone
Sure.
before we get into it. So because I want people to actually listen to this discussion and follow along to the end without jumping to any conclusions.
Sure.
Right off the bat. And I've discovered, and this surprises me, that the vast majority of Christians are still completely unaware of the facts surrounding recent disclosures by many high-ranking officials, and this is both foreign and domestic. We've got respected academics, scientists, hundreds of military and commercial aviators, naval commanders, diplomats, heads of states, congressmen, senators, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of States, and even former presidents. So this is all getting my attention as I'm listening to some of the stuff that's coming across. And so I reached out to you, what was it, last week, about a new documentary that's about to come out. And I've got a clip. You can't see it, but I don't know if you've seen the trailer. We're going to play about 30 seconds of it so the audience kind of knows what direction we're going in. So if Parker's got that queued up.
The American people are ready to receive the truth.
Humanity is not the only intelligence in the universe.
Humanity is not the only intelligent species.
We are absolutely not alone.
Non-human intelligence exists.
UAPs are real, they're here, and they're not human. I spent 25 years as a senior official with the CIA.
I've worked on highly classified UAP programs.
28 years as an astrophysicist.
I served as the 4th Director of National Intelligence.
Director of Aviation Security in the National Security Council.
The one-star admiral after 32 years of service.
People that come forward with this, I feel like they've taken their life in their own hands.
So that last guy was Senator Tim Burchett, of our own congressman in Tennessee. This is a brand new documentary. It's not even available yet for viewing. Not sure when that's going to be released, but it'll be released, I think, to most of the major streaming, Netflix, Amazon, that kind of stuff. So this is a well-respected documentary guy, Dan Farah. He's featured 34 senior members of U.S. government, military, and the intelligence community. Basically, this documentary is going to reveal an 80-year cover-up of the existence, listen now, non-human intelligent life in a secret war amongst major nations to reverse engineer the technology that's non-human origin. And the claim is that the film is going to expose a profound impact the situation is going to have on the future of humanity while providing a look behind the scenes with those at the forefront of the bipartisan disclosure effort that's coming our way. So this documentary comes right on the heels of the congressional hearings on UAPs, which is unidentified anomalous phenomenon, aka UFOs.
Right.
That's what most people. And the Senate proposed legislation for this disclosure. So we're talking about people like Lou Elizondo. He's the former director of Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program with the Pentagon. Jay Stratton, former director of intelligence with Joint Warfare Analysis Center. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. General James Clapper, former director of National Intelligence. Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. Astrophysicist Dr. Davis. You got Senators Mike Round, Senator Gillibrand, Representatives Carson Burchett, who was just there on the last. I mean, we're not talking about the farmers with the tinfoil hats, rednecks, that are out there on the farm making these claims. We're talking about like the top echelon of our government. I've in my own research, even going back, I uncovered some narratives or some comments by Jimmy Carter, by Ronald Reagan. He and the guy that was flying him both saw an object that they said, exceeded speeds of anything that we have. Barack Obama has kind of, he's alluded to the fact that he knows some stuff. Bill Clinton has alluded to the fact. So we're not talking anymore about just, some uneducated person out there. These right. are the top guys out there. So,
yeah, they're not bottom feeders.
No.
I think it's important to start there. Because, this topic is so consequential that we have to be careful who we listen to. The majority of our audience, us included, have probably never seen with our own two eyes what we would declaratively say is a UFO or a UAP. And so a lot of this is we are taking testimony from people who have been under oath, such as the Lou Elizondos of the world, who recently testified in a committee, House committee hearing, that he, as well as the others who were there, you had Mike Gold, I believe, who worked for NASA. You had Tim Gallaudet, which spent a long time with NOAA, which is the oceanic underwater territory of the government. They spent a lot of time in that. You had various reporters who have also testified, some under oath, such as Michael Schellenberger, who was there in that hearing, which he was instrumental, as well as other figures such as Jeremy Corbell, in providing documentation to our Congress that there are named programs that have been operating in the black. They are secret black budget programs, one of which was named called Immaculate Constellation, which was kind of an umbrella program that digitizes and collects digital records of objects that are supposedly of non-human origin. And so, yes, I mean, all of these individuals that we've named that will be in Dan Farr's program called The Age of Disclosure, all those that were in other documentaries such as James Fox recently released a documentary called The Program, which the program is the government crash retrieval program, reverse engineering program of non-human intelligence. All of these individuals, there's a bevy of individuals inside and outside the government that have all stated emphatically that we are not alone. Mm-hmm. And so what are we to think of this, as a person or people of faith? And I'm sure we're going to get into all of these things today in our discussion, but this is a very shocking and serious topic.
Yeah. And, one of the things in my just general conversations with, the average Christian is, why are you wasting your time even, this is just silly, it's make-believe, it's fake, whatever, fake news kind of stuff. And, I think that's a carryover from past times when really, this was science fiction stuff. It was the thing that came out of movies, and to pay it any real serious attention was, you got labeled as crazy. If you actually believed in, or even suggested that you believed in that, you were just completely discredited and
oh, for sure,
looked at as just that kind of crazy person who's got the tinfoil hat on.
For sure. And now, more things are coming out that even some of these science fiction movies were steered by certain three-letter agencies within our own government to essentially condition the people for certain situations. And even Steven Spielberg has come out and, said that is somewhat true. And so, you're right. Anytime we think about UFOs, non-human beings, embodied beings, we typically think of those Hollywood movies and those images and those themes stick in our mind, whether it is Close Encounters, the movie E.T., which was one of my favorite movies growing up. Mm-hmm. I had a love-hate relationship with E.T. I loved to watch it, but I was so terrified.
Yeah.
And, series such as The X-Files. And so we have all grown up with this science fiction feast, and it is a very popularized source of information, source of entertainment. We love it. And now what we are learning is it's not all just entertainment. And so, it's a shocking thing. It is a shocking thing.
Yeah, and I want to. Shocking is a good word. I call it ontological trauma.
Yeah.
Because really, when you start to think about, or some people say ontological shock. But I like the word trauma.
Yeah.
Because it really threatens our as Christians, our worldview narratives, because this does not fit in anywhere. As far as our traditional Christian narratives, our traditional Christian worldview, and if we begin to entertain this as actual something that could exist, we shut down At least the ones I've talked to is like, you know what, you're just being silly. Don't talk to me about this. Stop wasting my time with this. Don't you have more serious things to think about? And it's not that I dwell on it all that much, but I'm thinking about it now because it's got my attention. From the standpoint of empirical evidence continues to leak out and leak out and leak out. And now it's like, as a Christian, what do I make of this? What do I do with this? So that's the first question I guess I have for you as Christians. How do we know that this isn't just like our own technology? Because can we trust the government? Clearly we can't. I don't think anybody would disagree with the fact that the government has like some shadow programs that nobody knows about. This being probably one of them, but what if it's just our own technology? Like, why are you going to try to convince me that it's something of non-human origin?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great question. I would say that some of it might be our own black budget programs, secret technology, but the claim is, Craig, that that technology is born out of non-human technology or alien tech, to use that term. I mean, these are the claims that are being made by high government officials that we have recovered craft of non-human origin, and we, for the past 80 years, have been working on trying to reverse engineer them, okay, and for our own means. And the claims are that there is a secret arms race, not only within the United States, but worldwide, to reverse engineer this technology because it has a lot of applications. It has free energy applications, supposedly. It has obviously a weaponized aspect of it, and that is probably what our government is most interested in. If this technology does exist, and we have been reverse engineering it, how can we use it to protect our citizens? How can we use it to have world dominance? And so there's, again, many different supposed applications for it. But I came across this, and you know from our previous discussions that I have a long interest in the supernatural aspects of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned is that the modern church struggles with even angels and demons.
Yeah.
They really do. Give me the safe stuff. Give me the virgin birth. That's supernatural. I will accept that. Give me the resurrection. That is supernatural. I accept that. But don't talk about Genesis 6, 1 through 4, the sons of God marrying the daughters of women, even though the early church, all in ancient Judaism, they were clear this is a supernatural rebellion going on here. The modern church, from my experience, struggles to accept this, primarily those in leadership positions. And I can't say that loud enough. It's partially because I think, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but as a teacher or preacher, it's very difficult to backtrack and maybe change your position on things because you're so locked in, or because you're so set in your ways, or because you've taught something previously for a long period of time and it's hard to change.
Yeah.
I have seen a ready acceptance towards the younger generation of ministers coming up. They are more open-minded. They are willing to look at the evidence that is laid out and to accept more of the supernatural side of the Bible, because it is still there. And so I have a great interest in that. And so naturally, right, when our government started talking and there were hearings in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and you have people such as the Marco Rubios of the world, which is sitting right beside Trump in cabinet meetings occasionally, you start to pay attention. And I saw a threat to – I saw this topic very quickly as one of the biggest threats to faith that I've ever seen.
Yep. Why is that? Let's go down that, because
Sure.
that's really what I wanted to get to,
Yeah.
which is really why we got to have some listeners saying, why are you even talking about this? This is just ridiculous. Like, why?
Yeah.
And so I want to go down that and explain for the person who's, like, let's say, more grounded in reality and doesn't have time for fantasy fiction kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Why would we be wasting time talking about this?
Well, here's why we're not wasting time talking about this, because let's suppose just for a minute that our government says we're not alone officially in some capacity, and they roll out the evidence for that in some way. The first thing that's going to happen is that Christians are going to go to church on Sunday morning or Wednesday night or whenever they gather, and they're going to go straight to their leadership, and they're going to ask them, what in the world is this? Okay, they're just going to be freaked out, and they're going to be scared, and they're going to be doubting. Some will even doubt the genuineness of this reality. Some will doubt the genuineness of the narrative of the Bible. Why? Well, the Bible does not say anywhere within its pages that God made beings on other planets. Okay? It doesn't say that. It doesn't indicate that. Now, I do explore that in my upcoming book, how God has the power to do that, how he could do that without telling us. But it does cause some seemingly, and I'm putting this in air quotes, theological problems, all of which can be solved, and I try to work through those in my book in depth. But just to give you a little flavor, one thing that comes up is the incarnation of Jesus. Okay, so if God made beings on other planets, do they need saving? Well, that's a great question. We needed saving. We fell. And can God make beings that don't fall? I'm sure he can. That is not the case with us. That is not the case with the angels. But can God make beings that don't need saving? Sure he can. But if God did what he did here on other planets, then the likelihood that they would need saving, that they would fall from his grace, is astronomical. Okay? And so if that is the case, then would that require Jesus to hop from planet to planet and die on their behalf? Okay? Mm-hmm. And so that is where some people's minds go. Would this require a planet-hopping Jesus to redeem each creature that God has made on other planets? Well, I work through that. Again, I try to talk through that in my book. We don't have time to go into all of that here, but that is just one example, Craig, of where people's minds might go if they hear their president say, we are not alone, and they're coming to church and they're asking their elders, what the Bible doesn't talk about this, does not seem to fit in the biblical story. What does this mean for salvation and the incarnation of Jesus? What does this mean for the end of time? Are these beings older than we are? Were they made before us? Because our government is saying they're much older, and they have a worldview that these beings have evolved over millions of years, and they're vastly superior than we are. That's why they have superior technology and can travel back and forth. Why would God leave us in the dark if he knew that it was a possibility that we could have an encounter with these beings? What does this mean for the end of time? What does this mean for God's plan for the entire universe? This is kind of the mess that gets dropped in the lap of elders and preachers when disclosure officially happens. And this is why we're having this discussion. Because what we can't do is we can't kick the can down the road and ignore it. We can't say that this is a Steven Spielberg movie. We can't say that it can't be true because God didn't tell us. God didn't tell us a lot of things. The secret things belong to the Lord. I mean, we have to deal with this because you and I both know that we have always been people of evidence, and that is one thing we have shouted from the rooftops, evidence that Christianity is true.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the evidence. The evidence points to a cataclysmic flood that came on the earth. So look at the evidence. The Bible backs this up. And so the evidence has always been on our side. But what happens when the evidence is suddenly seemingly diametric or opposed to what we believe to be true?
Mm-hmm.
And I think our inclination is to ignore it, to act like it doesn't exist, or it is not evidence, when in actuality it is legitimate evidence, and we are just too nervous or too scared or too timid to actually deal with the evidence and wrestle with it.
When along those lines, when you go back our human history, we've got centuries and centuries of traditions that have viewed us as, we are egocentric, very much so. We are the center of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, when I stop and I think about it logically from a biblical narrative, and I think, okay, we're created imago Dei, in the image of God. And that entails a whole lot of stuff, right? There's, and you look at God and you stand back and you look at his nature. Things that we can say definitively about his nature is he is a creator God. And just within the heavenly realms, we see variety, seraphim, cherubim, angels, so different types of supernatural beings, entities, if you want to call them that. And then you look at us and good grief, our vast diversity here on planet Earth is just astounding. Not only within the human species, in our own diversity from person to person, personalities and genetics and all of that, but you look at the animal kingdom and just the wide creative range that God has displayed for us. So it seems like to me, if I'm looking at it from that standpoint, why would I make the assumption that after God made humans, he said, you know what? This is it. This is the pinnacle. I'm not creating any other intelligent life form because this thing that I've just created it tops all of. I can't compete with this anymore. There's nothing else I can create. This is it. When the fact of the matter is, as human beings, we continue to create music, art.
That's true.
People. So it seems to me, and I could be off base, but it seems to me to be a very narrow-minded, arrogant type of stance to attribute to God, we're it. In the vastness of the universe, you just talk about the Milky Way galaxy is so vast we can't put our brains around the vastness of just the Milky Way. But you're talking about the Milky Way being kind of an average size galaxy among trillions of galaxies. So we're to expect that God created that amount of space, that vastness that defies comprehension, and we're the only intelligent life form in all of that.
Right.
So that's the Christian the paradigm that we've established for ourselves.
Yeah, and someone could say, if God is a creator, and he is, and God is eternal, and God has always existed, what makes you think you are his first creation?
Or his last.
Or his last.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there's legitimate point there to be made. One thing I approached this study when I started studying this topic. I approached it a very similar way that I approached my previous two books, and the way I approached those books was essentially looking at the ancient context and looking at documentation, evidence, evidence-based, and I did not come to it with really a lot of preconceived notions. I tried to just let the evidence take me where it would. And what I found, even digging back into antiquity, is that the Jews even assumed in their various writings outside the canon, they even assumed that God spent his nights, for example, traveling planet to planet, observing and enjoying the creation he has made. Now, I was surprised, when I came across a lot of this. I didn't know how the Jewish perspective was of the cosmos. Of course, they didn't have the telescopes and everything that we have, but make no mistake, they were great astronomers. In fact, I would say the average person who lived in the Old Testament times, they were much more versed in astronomy than we are. Astronomy, and I talked about this in my second book, Gate of the Gods, the stars really drove everyday life for the ancient person. They really did. I mean, essentially we found a set of tablets called the Enuma Anu Enlil in the, I believe it was in the library of Ashurbanipal, and it was a set of 70 tablets with over 7,000 scenarios, astronomical scenarios on these tablets. And to be blunt, it would say something like, when you see this star over here, you need to do this for your God, or your God is thinking this, or this is coming, okay? So that, 7,000 scenarios, that'll keep you busy.
Yeah.
And so these ancient civilizations, such as the Babylons of the world, they would literally do everything based upon the movement of the stars, because they looked at the sky as a tablet for the gods. Okay, we look at it and we say, "Oh, isn't that nice?" They literally saw it as the tablet of the gods. Certain gods were even associated with certain planets. I actually talk about this in Revelation, how there's actually called in Revelation. There's some prophecies there that are based upon they're called astral prophecies, and they are essentially prophecies that can be solved, if you will, or understood if you understand ancient astronomy. And even the four horsemen in Revelation are riding upon a certain color horse. They have a certain function. And what I wrote about in that book is how these four horsemen are basically Babylonian deities who are, demonic equestrian coming to afflict the four corners of the earth, and how the color of the horse they ride on and their function and their description is associated with certain Babylonian gods based upon this ancient understanding of the Enuma Anu Enlil, and how that Babylonian teaching lived well into the first century. Okay, I just did a great study of the book of Daniel. Daniel finds himself in Babylon, and he climbs the ranks of the Babylonian astrologers. He becomes the top of the top. He actually studied in their school for a number of years. What was he taught? I'm assumingly he was taught Babylonian astrology. So my point is that the ancient world, even in the Jewish, the Christian, and before the flood, even this information was ubiquitous. It was everywhere. And so now here we find ourselves as modern people being confronted with what we think is a modern revelation or a modern problem, and we are starting to think about these things for the first time when really the ancient world thought about them every day.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next question: is why now? Like, why are we beginning to see these disclosures that appear to have a lot of empirical evidence behind them? Like the radar, the military craft, those
right.
things that have been released, where you're seeing vehicles in the sky, and you're looking at that, and the experts are saying this far exceeds any type of technology that anybody can produce right now.
Yeah.
Which kind of alludes to another question I had is, how do we know this isn't China? How do we know this isn't Russia? And I think the short answer to that is, if it was, we would be dominated by either one of those countries right now if they had that technology.
Correct. We would. Another thing to point out is that going back decades, all of these countries have a UFO program. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
Do you think they all got together and said, hey, let's just start a UFO program? No. They all started a UFO program organically because of the craft they were seeing was far superior than anything humans can make.
Right.
The U.S. has had, 3 or 4 or more UFO programs over the years, studies. You mentioned several earlier, ATIP, ALSAP, which was kind of the program, the umbrella program under which ATIP operated. You had the Project Blue Book with Dr. Hynek.
Mm-hmm.
The list goes on and on. There's actually countries right now, such as Japan, who are just now getting in the UFO game. I mean, they are just recently launching their own UFO investigation programs. So, rise it right now. Well, that is the $1 million question. I think we have to look at this from different lenses. First, you have the social media lens. The idea that information can travel lightning fast, just like that, and reach millions. I think that is partly why it is coming out now, because back in the 40s, going all the way back to the Roswell incident in 1947, information really just didn't get very far. I mean, for example, they printed several days after the Roswell incident that they have recovered flying saucers. That went in the newspaper. That was quickly redacted and hushed up. In today's world, it would be a lot more difficult to quiet that down. And so through the decades, through the 40s and the 50s, you got all these various presidents. And I actually, in my book, I take the reader into this topic from George Washington forward, because it actually does go back to the very beginning of our country. The first 3 presidents, in fact, I have a chapter on each of them. Just to give you a little preview, Thomas Jefferson actually reported a UFO type event that was reported to him. Now, he himself did not see it, but Jefferson was of course, he was the president, but he was also the president of basically what we would call a secret it wasn't a secret organization, but it was an organization that gave TED Talks. Okay, they gave TED Talks.
Yeah.
And at that particular meeting, he reported in detail what was seen. And so John Adams, the second president of the United States, he was vice president under George Washington. He actually, in his private diaries, wrote about the inhabitants of other worlds and speculated and postulated about that. And so, the point is, this topic goes back many, many decades when it comes to the history of our country. But the fact that technology, these phones and social media and YouTube and, live stream and whatever, the fact that you can't keep something quiet anymore, that changes the game, because the government has wanted to keep this quiet, and they still largely want to keep this quiet.
Which I understand why. I mean, I get that, because we've already kind of talked about, are we ready for something like that? And I think most people are not. I mean, maybe they are, maybe more so now than ever, if there was a good time. But I just thinking about the implications to this, to Christianity, really.
Yeah.
What does that look like, for us? And so we've just kind of scratched the surface on that a little bit. So
yeah, and before we talk about that, I just wanted to say also, the government wants to keep it quiet for many reasons. It's not one reason. One reason is what you said. Maybe they're trying to prevent mass hysteria. Mm-hmm. There is a Christian element inside our government right now that Lou Elizondo named in his book Imminent. And that group, I believe it was called the Collins Elite. And if I get that name wrong, forgive me, but I believe that's the name of the group. But he says, and Lou Elizondo is not a professing Christian that I know of, but he says that there are individuals in our government who are functioning in this shadow government, so to speak, who are Christian people with a Christian worldview that believe that what is happening is demonic, and that the Christian thing to do, or the national security thing to do, would be to suppress this information so that this demonic presence does not have a platform and an audience to entertain or to deceive.
Tim Burchett is on record. I watched this just the other day. Said almost exactly the same thing on camera. So this is a sitting U.S. congressman who publicly made a declaration that these entities are demonic in nature and that they are real. And you know, it's just like, wait, did I just hear what I thought I heard from a sitting congressman?
Yeah,
and he has everything to lose by saying that and nothing to gain, which that's the type of stuff that gets my attention, where I'm like, okay, I need to think about this. So let's talk a little bit about that aspect of it. So how do we know, or do we know, is this just another created being by God who is not supernatural? It's not in the heavenly host realm sphere, but you know, something biological? Are these fallen angels who have somehow created or taken on a different form that they want to, like, maybe trick humans into believing there is no God by them saying, you know, we've been here forever, we've evolved, your theology is incorrect, and let us prove it to you. And it seems like they can prove it to us because of their advanced technology.
Right. And in that advanced tech, let's assume, let's run with the line that these are fallen angels or demons deceiving the world. If that's the case, they're doing the same thing they've always done. You know, before the flood, they introduced to man basically a form of technology which was superior. They taught man how to make weapons. They taught man about mixing of medicines, you know, things such as that. You even get into, you know, Ezekiel's will, and some associate that or conflate that with you know, what a UFO would be. But the point is that before the flood, before God had to wipe the slate clean, there was some of that to where they were introducing this, you know, next level of technology. And so if it is fallen angels or demons that we are dealing with exclusively, then they're doing what they've always done. And so why have they done it? Why have they done that? Well, they've always done that because they have been trying to lead man in a path of destruction, because that's what ultimately, if you think about it, if everybody's honest, yeah, we love our technology, we all love our phones, but think about how many problems technology has caused, you know, over the years. If humanity has been slowly guided by the hand of fallen evil entities from the powers of darkness, they have been slowly guiding us deeper and deeper into self-destruction.
Right.
I mean, you think about nuclear weapons, and it's now reported that these objects in the sky, UFOs, UAPs, have turned on and have both turned off our nuclear weapons at various sites. So they are showing a dominance, and they are attracted to, apparently, according to Lou Elizondo, who said that part of the ATIP plan was to basically get a bunch of nuclear weapons on a ship and put it out in the middle of the ocean to lure these UAPs in hopes that they could then blast them out of the sky with some kind of form of technology that would disable them and recover them and then reverse engineer them. So again, if it's the case that what we are dealing with is the same old fallen angels and demons, powers of darkness, they are right on schedule. They are doing what they always do. The book of Revelation shows an intensification of demonic activity. It just does. It shows that there is an intensification of the powers of darkness, of demonic activity. Paul even, and then whether this is related to this topic or not, and I believe it may, Paul even talks about that the Antichrist will come and will rise, and that basically there is a restrainer holding the Antichrist, the last Antichrist. There's many, we already know that, but there is a final. Holding him back, or the entity back, until he's released. So could it be the case, and I don't know this to be fact, could it be the case that what we are seeing is the restrainer, which I would say would be Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who has been restraining the powers of darkness, whether directly, such as in the book of Daniel, where the prince of Persia was confronted, and the prince of Greece was confronted by one of God's angelic hosts, or whether by Christian influence, such as people within our own government that have been suppressing this information. Could it be the case that the restrainer is letting go of the reins because this is prophetic, and this is a part of eschatology, this is a part of the end times deception, perhaps? I could see all of that being true. I don't know that to be 100%, but I could see that being true.
You know, when I think about what you're saying, and this is kind of how my mind goes. So if I'm under the authority of my liege lord, you know, so let's say Satan, I followed him out of heaven, you know, the cast out and everything, and so I'm one of the fallen angels. I report to Satan, and that unleashing, that time is getting the reins are getting loosened, so to speak. The game plan there has got to be, if you're thinking about this from Satan's standpoint, the game plan has to be, look, you can't, if I'm Satan talking to you're my demon, you know, guy, look, we can't go out there and just show ourselves to be angels, like former heavenly residents. Okay. We can't do that, because what is that going to show to mankind? That there is a spiritual world.
Yeah. Exactly.
And if there's bad angels, then there's good angels. And if there's good angels, then there's God, you know, and that's self-defeatist. We can't do that. So what we're going to do is masquerade as actual advanced biological entities that are so beyond mankind. And we can spin this to be like, look at us. You know, we've been here millions upon millions upon millions of years. We know for a fact what the evolutionary process looked like because we were there, and we can prove this to you because look at what we can do. And we're telling you point blank, there is no God.
Yeah.
That we are, as a matter of fact, we made you all.
Exactly.
So to me, that seems like the genius game plan. And if Christians are not up to speed on that eschatological stuff that we're talking about and why we're seeing the things that we're seeing, then I see a lot of Christians, especially those who don't have a strong faith or who are already struggling, and they're done. They're going to walk.
They're going to walk, and that's exactly why we're having this conversation. And I think we need to be open to eschatology. We need to study it more. We need to know the Old Testament better. We need to know the supernatural landscape better. You know, all of this is true. All of this is necessary. All of this is important.
But it's hard. It's scary. I mean, I don't like dealing with this stuff.
It is, yeah. It is.
And
hard.
I think most people are like me. They're just like, what? Let me just live my life. Let me stay in my own traditional paradigms, and hopefully I die before any of this stuff happens, and I don't have to learn the truth.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, this is why I said earlier, Craig, this topic threatens the church more than any other topic. And again, going back to that passage in Thessalonians where Paul talks about the deceiver and the Antichrist narrative. What would be, because it talks about the great apostasy in that passage. Now, again, we're not saying this is it. We're saying it could be it. Mm-hmm. But what could cause such a mass exodus of believers from the ecclesia or from the church? And not just locally, but globally.
Yeah.
That's something we got to think about too. What Paul's describing is a global apostasy. This narrative that aliens or non-human intelligences seeded the earth and they are older than us and they made us, they engineered us, whatever you want to say, that falsehood is powerful enough and scary enough to cause a mass exodus from the faith.
Yeah, and Christians are already under persecution by non-believers. They're like, you guys are stupid, you're uneducated, you're unintelligent. Imagine something like this happening where now we have evidence, like hardcore, like empirical stuff that you can touch and taste and see and smell. How much worse will it be for the non-believers to jump on that bus and say, guys, we've been telling you all along, and now you've got the evidence and you're still hanging on to that myth. Like, don't you get it? Like, are you going to waste your time?
It's outdated. Yeah, they're going to say the Bible's outdated. It's antiquated. It's irrelevant. It has been trumped by this realization that apparently we were made by these other beings. And so, quit church.
And a lot will.
Yeah, a lot will. Put your Bible down. Never read it again. It's void. It's nullified. It's pointless.
But if we shift, and here's kind of where I was going with this, if we not change, but shift our lens on the biblical narrative of what Revelation, what the things that are out there in our Scripture right now, and look at this from the standpoint of what's happening right now, God has called this. I mean, we need to shift that and just put our traditional thinking of what we think is true about God. Again, not changing the fundamental stuff, but just rethinking this in a term, maybe the ancient, like you mentioned, the Jewish view of the stars and the constellations and all of that. And we shift that just slightly to where we look at this from the standpoint of God providing us with the warning. So as we read through the prophetic materials of the Bible and we see, does this match up with some of the things that are beginning to come out, we all of a sudden see that not only does it match, but it's calling the plays by play. And so how does that sit with us? Like, what do we do with that? Do we try to work through that and shift our paradigms just slightly a little bit so it would allow the possibility that the demonic forces and fallen angels would be working through this type of thing? Or do we just refuse to accept any of it? Like you said, we don't have a problem accepting, the virgin birth. We don't have a problem accepting, Jesus raising, but we all of a sudden have problems with demonic forces.
I can't tell you how many people have said to me concerning Genesis 6:1-4 or Deuteronomy 32:8-9, these big passages that are part of the cosmic worldview that teach about angels and how they're real and how not only are they real, but they've been on earth, been worshipped as gods, et cetera, et cetera. Do you really have to know this to go to heaven? Is this really necessary to talk about for salvation? Tyler, we really need to talk about the basics so people can get to heaven and not get bogged down in this weird stuff.
Yeah.
And and that's I can't tell you how many people have said that. And I could say, at one point I could say, I understand what you're saying, and I respect that, and there are things that we need to talk about, but now you throw this revelation into the mix, and it's no longer, well, do we really need to know this? No, it's if we don't know this, if we don't talk about it, it may not affect your salvation, but it may affect somebody else's salvation because they may walk away because they were never given the framework. They were never given the whole story of the Bible in its ancient context. Therefore, the Bible must not be true. The Bible must not be real. When the truth is, no, the Bible has talked about all of this going back, but even before the flood, and we have been too stubborn as modern Christians to reevaluate our posture or position when it comes to the supernatural.
Yeah.
And so now it's going to catch us on our heels. Preachers and teachers and church members, leaders, they're not going to know how to deal with it. But I'm hoping and praying that enough people will be awakened, because that's what it is. They need to be awakened to the supernatural war of the Bible so that they will be equipped to deal with what is actually happening in real time on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Because many people read the Bible, that's an old story that happened a long time ago. Angels are in another dimension. They're not even here. And what our government is telling us is there's something happening with non-human beings on planet Earth. Physical bodies, physical craft have been recovered. And here's the evidence. So now suddenly the Bible becomes real. It doesn't become a theory or a theology even, or an idea. It becomes not even history. It becomes right now, in this present moment, beings are interacting and walking upon this earth. They are among us. The Bible says we can entertain angels even unaware. They are among us, and this is not just a concept. This is a reality.
Yeah. Man, that's again, I'm so stuck in my worldview, right? This is just hard for me to be like, yeah, okay, it all makes sense, and it's all when you boil it all down, it's logical, but I just can't. And I still struggle with that. And if I struggle with it, I know a lot of other people struggle with it too. But the more I look at it, the more I examine it, the more I dig into it, the more I realize that I've got to open my eyes on this, and I've got to take this stuff seriously. And it may not happen in my lifetime. I hope it doesn't. Like I said earlier, I really don't. But I guess I'm leaning towards the fact that for me to accept it, it is a supernatural thing. It's not necessarily some other created being, although I haven't ruled that out completely either.
And I'm kind of with you on that. I don't tell people what to believe in this new book. I kind of explore both trajectories, but again, I like to follow the evidence. And so one thing I've found, not to get too strange here, we're already strange, I guess.
This is the strangest podcast I've ever done.
This is the strangest one. Okay, so we can say it. One aspect of this that has not been talked about in Congress yet is the abduction phenomenon. This is the strangest part of this phenomenon, and I reviewed case studies going back decades, dozens, hundreds of abduction cases. There were years ago, Dr. John Mack was a professor at Harvard University. He started investigating this, got a lot of flack for it, but he produced a lot of great material and insight into the abduction phenomenon. He's not alone. Others have, since he actually passed away. He's not here anymore, but others have picked up that mantle and have continued with that. And so I have actually looked at the metrics, the data, the stories, the testimony of abductees, and I put a lot of that together in my book, and it has led me to a conclusion that what I'm looking at, this evidence, is demonic. That's where the evidence has led me, that based upon all this information, the Old Testament backdrop, the not just the Old Testament backdrop, but the ancient backdrop, the gods of the nations, the activity of angels before the flood and after the flood, the Tower of Babel, modern day, testimony, sworn testimony in Congress, the Senate, whistleblowers in the intelligence agency, David Grush, the abduction phenomenon, all of the witness testimony, everything, put it in a blender, and it screams demonic. Mm-hmm. It's not even close.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the pushback on that would be the people are like, yeah, but what about the benevolent acts that we see? They're concerned about us wiping ourselves out, and they shut down nuclear sites. But I mean, to me, doesn't that just sort of play into the game plan of Satan? He's like, we can't come across as not benevolent because we want to earn the trust of the people so we can, fool them, trick them. So we have to have that element in there, like we're actually doing them some good stuff and sharing technology, and we're worried about their planet, and we're worried about their nuclear weapons, and so that kind of plays into the strategy there, I would think.
I know I wrestle with that in the upcoming book as well. There could be several things happening at the same time. It may not just be one. You have both good angels and bad angels, right? Fallen and righteous. Some of these seemingly positive encounters, could they be among God's heavenly host? Possibly. Could some of these seemingly positive encounters be trepidation? Could they be basically a demonic deception? That's highly likely. And let me even throw this strange, unlikely but possible caveat, and your viewers may not like this, but could it be that some of the angels that have fallen are remorseful for what they have done? We see that is the case evidently in the Jewish literature, in the Dead Sea Scroll material, the Jewish book of First Enoch, the Watchers who were locked under gloomy chains of darkness because of their sins prior to the flood, asked Enoch if he could go and plead on their behalf that they be let out. Again, that's not in the Bible, but it is a historical document that was read in the early church and is quoted in the Bible.
In Jude, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is a precedence there for maybe some remorse. So there's a lot, and by the way, I should say that the answer was you're not getting out. Okay, so there's no redemption for fallen angels.
Yeah, it's one and done.
One and done. And so I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to have all the answers. No one really probably has all the answers. There are some that have more than others, and apparently they're in our government, and they're starting to come out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're not really sure. I mean, we're taking this play by play. One thing I have noticed though is there is an acceleration. Yeah. The UFO topic was in the fringe for decades, and in 2017, a New York Times article came out that basically said, and it was written by Leslie Kane, and I believe it was Leslie Kane. And maybe Ralph Blumenthal, they revealed this historical, illegal, reverse engineering, craft retrieval program of non-human technology. Ever since 2017, this topic has had exponential growth. It has accelerated to the point that it is now being brought up by when President Trump was running for re-election. He was on podcast after podcast. almost every podcast would ask him about UFOs. So his own son interviewed him about UFOs, Don Jr. Don Jr., I was listening, he had a podcast the other day. He has his own podcast. He had a whole program about reverse engineering alien technology. This is Donald Trump's son pushing his dad to disclose more and more information.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. We're out of time. That's a quick hour, man. We could go on. Give me the kind of like the final thoughts that you've got as we close things out, and then I'm going to have you read a passage of scripture. I always like to close out the show with a passage of scripture. I'm going to say a few things, but final thoughts.
Final thoughts. We don't have to fear this as Christian people. But we also don't want to be ignorant. We want to educate ourselves. We want to pay attention to the news because we don't live in a bubble. We live in a real functioning society, and anticipate more and more of this coming out. Mm-hmm. There is a big push for disclosure, and that is the buzzword these days, transparency, disclosure. Yeah. And so expect a trickle disclosure to continue to happen. There's also a possibility for a catastrophic disclosure, which is a sudden disclosure, not a trickle one, where suddenly and unexpectedly there is a government announcement either by the president or his cabinet members or whomever that states boldly, we are not alone. Mm-hmm. So what can you do? You can study, you can pray, and you can continue to get plugged into this topic as it continues to unravel. But continue to trust in God. And I'll read here from Psalm chapter 82. This psalm is a psalm about the fallen angels that were over the nations, that led the nations in darkness. They were called small g gods. And the whole psalm is about them. And here is how the psalm ends. Verse 6, I said you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. So whatever is happening, whatever nefarious deception is happening, God has promised retribution will come upon these entities. And the psalmist ends the chapter by calling on God, Yahweh, to basically take back the nations, to take back the territory, the domain. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. And so that is what is happening. That is what has started to happen with the gospel. That is partly our mission, largely our mission, is to go into all the world and teach them, bring them out of darkness into the light. And believe it or not, who would have ever thought it, Craig? Talking about UFOs is a part of that discussion.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, that passage gives people like me a lot of hope, something to anchor ourselves in these weird times that we're in right now. I'd like to give a shout out for those who are listening. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ministry League, who's a fantastic app. If you haven't downloaded it, you need to go download it today. It lists a lot of other, including our podcast. It has a library there of some really fantastic Christian podcasts, if that's something that interests you. Also, if you are not aware, we here at Central have another podcast that out of this media studio called After Sunday, Digging Deeper. It's a recap of my lesson, and Sky and Alex host that show, and they basically take what I said and make it sound a lot better in a lot quicker period of time. So I really appreciate how they recap and summarize each Sunday's lesson. Subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Share this if you like it and think that it would be beneficial for other people to hear. Tyler, thank you so much for being here today. This was really an interesting conversation. When your book comes out, give us a notification.
I certainly will,
on that, because I'd love to read it. And, maybe if you're willing to come back where I have your book to actually talk about, that would be pretty cool, too.
We will definitely do that.
Awesome. Until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, love one another, be kind to one another, and remember that the creator of the universe loves you so much that he gave his only son for you. Have a blessed day.